Glad to know you're still with us. Sub-Saharan Africa is on the cusp of a transformative energy revolution. A new study by Wood Mackenzie reveals a staggering $193 billion investment opportunity in renewable energy and transmission by 2031. This is a region where nearly half the population lives without electricity, and the potential returns are significantly higher than those in mature markets like Europe and the US.
Africa has just taken a step the world wasn't prepared for, a bold move that is sending shockwaves across global energy markets. A shift so significant that European analysts, investors, and policymakers are suddenly scrambling for answers. Because right now, a new power grid rising across Africa is challenging long-standing assumptions about who leads, who follows, and who controls the future of global energy. This is the story of how Africa's energy revolution has stunned Europe, and why no one saw this coming. For decades, Africa has been written into the global narrative as a continent waiting for development, waiting for supply, waiting for infrastructure. But over the past 5 years, something extraordinary has happened. Quietly, steadily, and then suddenly. Energy production across Africa surged. Renewable projects multiplied. And entire nations began planning continental-scale power grids, not just to power cities, but to export electricity, stabilize regional economies, and transform Africa's global position. Across Europe, many experts simply did not expect the speed, scale, or ambition. But the signs were always there. From Morocco's massive Noor solar complex, one of the largest solar farms on Earth, to Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, Africa's biggest hydroelectric project, to Kenya's booming geothermal fields providing more clean energy per capita than many European states, Africa wasn't just catching up. It was leapfrogging, in energy, in technology, in infrastructure planning. And Europe, long accustomed to being the reference point of development, suddenly found itself looking at Africa with surprise and, increasingly, concern. To understand why Africa's energy rise shocked so many, you must understand the advantage Africa holds: sunlight, wind, geothermal heat, vast rivers, abundant land, rising investment partnerships, and a young, technically skilled population. Across Europe, renewable expansion faces difficult challenges: high land costs, limited space, aging infrastructure, and political disagreements. But in Africa, renewable potential is almost limitless. The Sahara alone receives enough sunlight to power the entire world multiple times over. Countries such as Morocco, Egypt, Algeria, Namibia, and South Africa are now racing to convert this potential into megascale solar power that can power industries and export electricity far beyond the continent. Africa's coastlines, especially around Kenya, South Africa, and the Horn of Africa, are home to some of the strongest, most consistent wind patterns globally. The Congo River has the hydroelectric potential to generate more electricity than several Western nations combined. And Kenya has become one of the world's leaders in geothermal innovation. Europe sees these developments with increasing attention because for the first time, Africa isn't just building energy for survival, it is building energy for leadership. But the real shock to Europe isn't just Africa's energy production, it's Africa's integration. Several African regions are now executing plans for interconnected power grids that can share electricity, reduce blackouts, and even export power to global partners. East Africa is building a power pool stretching from Kenya to Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Sudan. West Africa is developing a unified grid across ECOWAS nations. Southern Africa has its own power pool linking economies from South Africa to Botswana, Mozambique, Zambia, and Namibia. And North Africa's grid is already partially connected with Europe through Morocco, Egypt, and Tunisia. Africa is building something Europe cannot ignore: a continent-wide energy network with the potential to produce and export clean power on a scale the world has never seen. And that raises a critical question. What happens when Africa becomes an energy exporter while Europe becomes increasingly dependent on renewable imports? Europe has invested heavily in renewable energy, transitioning away from coal, phasing out nuclear in some countries, and reducing dependency on external suppliers. But in recent years, Europe has faced rising electricity costs, geopolitical energy shortages, and slow infrastructure upgrades. And Africa's rising energy sector has entered the global conversation at exactly the moment Europe faces uncertainty. European analysts now worry about 3 major implications. The first is energy competition. If Africa becomes a major exporter of renewable electricity, Europe could face increased competition in markets across Asia and the Middle East, regions Europe often relies on for industrial energy partnerships. The second is investment rivalry. Countries like China, India, the UAE, and Brazil have already invested billions into African solar farms, hydropower stations, battery storage facilities, and grid expansion projects. Europe expected to dominate this investment landscape, but Africa's rapid rise has attracted global players faster than anticipated. The third is technological leapfrogging. Africa isn't following old Western development models. It's adopting smart microgrids, AI-managed energy systems, new storage technologies, and modular renewable platforms that are often cheaper and more efficient than European infrastructure. This leap forward means Africa may skip decades of slow development and move straight into the future. Europe didn't expect the pace. Europe didn't expect the coordination. Europe didn't expect the global implications. But now, the world is watching. The world is also entering what many describe as the new energy race. Not a race for oil, but for clean, sustainable, low-cost power that will fuel the industries of the future. Africa's rise changes everything. China is aggressively investing in African energy as part of its global Belt and Road strategy. Gulf nations are funding African solar projects to support future green hydrogen exports. The United States sees Africa as an essential partner for renewable supply chains. Europe wants African partnerships, but it is no longer the only major player. Africa is no longer just participating in global energy markets. Africa is becoming a central player. And Europe is learning that influence must now be earned, not assumed. Africa's energy revolution is not just about global competition. It is transforming the continent internally. Reliable power enables rapid industrialization. Manufacturing zones expand. Jobs are created at unprecedented rates. Cheaper electricity strengthens African businesses, empowering local industries to compete in global markets. Urban centers expand with more stable water systems, hospitals, schools, and transportation infrastructure. Energy independence reduces the financial burden of importing costly fuels. And with stronger energy capacity, Africa gains a more influential voice in global negotiations, from climate talks to economic deals. This new Africa is stronger, smarter, more connected, and more future-oriented than the world expected. Europe will not collapse, and Africa is not overtaking Europe overnight. But dynamics are shifting. In the decades ahead, Europe may require African energy more than Africa requires European assistance. Experts predict rising energy prices across Europe, greater competition for renewable investment deals, and increased pressure to secure clean power imports. And as Africa's energy infrastructure matures, Europe may find itself relying on African energy just as it once relied on other regions. This shift does not signal a crisis, it signals a rebalancing of global power. And Europe must adapt to the new reality. Globally, institutions such as the United Nations, the African Union, the EU, and the African Development Bank are now tracking Africa's energy progress with renewed interest. Reports indicate that Africa could become one of the world's top renewable energy exporters by 2040. Africa may produce some of the world's cheapest clean electricity by 2035. And with the right investments, Africa could attract over $1 trillion in energy development by 2050. Africa's energy future is no longer a distant dream. It is a rapidly unfolding strategy, backed by data, infrastructure, and technological ambition. Africa's rise will not be without obstacles. Some regions lack stable funding. Others face political instability or corruption. Climate vulnerabilities remain real. Infrastructure must be maintained and expanded. But despite these challenges, the direction is unmistakable. Africa is becoming an energy innovator. Africa is building continent-wide grid networks. Africa is forming global partnerships. Africa is redefining renewable development. Europe must now decide whether to compete, collaborate, or risk falling behind. For too long, the world underestimated Africa. But today, the continent is rising, not with promises, but with power. Literal power. Electricity. Infrastructure. Energy. A future built with purpose. Africa's new power grid is not just a technological milestone, it is a statement. A message to the world that Africa is ready to lead in the industries that will define the next century. And Europe, for the first time in decades, must adjust to a world it never expected. A world where Africa stands at the center of global energy innovation. This is the revolution no one saw coming. And it's only just beginning.